Hey everybody, welcome back to the studio. I hope you're all doing well. In this video, I'd like to address a question I get quite a bit, especially from people on Instagram, specifically about my mic setups. Well, one is, why are there so many? Do I use them all? Are there phase problems? And that sort of thing. So I want to go through kind of what my concept of all this is. Now, this is not necessarily the setup I use all the time. It's always kind of a variation of this setup, but it's not always exactly the same thing. But some of the concepts go with me no matter what style or what genre we're doing. So first off, I look at a lot of this stuff as I'm already mixing. So I'm thinking, after I spoke with the artist about the type of sounds we want to get, I try to do my best to interpret that, and I go, okay, what do I need to do to ensure that we have everything we need while we're recording? And I'm already thinking of mix at that point. You know, maybe it's room mics I set up, maybe it's extra room mics, maybe it's some sort of close mic thing, maybe it's a extra effects mic or something like that. All that gets thought of and set up at tracking with mix in mind. So, first off, overheads. It all starts there. Ground freaking zero. If the overheads are not right, I don't move on. I either change the mics out, I move them, whatever. Oh, and one thing, I'm not gonna make this concept thing about the mics yet. I'll explain that at the end, maybe why I choose certain things, but right now, these are just, this is just concepts that I follow to capture the sounds we need. So the overheads are ground zero, it all starts there. Right now I have a Quasi ORTF because this setup is just left over from my session with Juan yesterday, and I just figured I'd shoot this video before I had to tear this stuff down for tomorrow's session. I do a space pair quite a bit with overheads. Sometimes it's mono. But whatever, it starts there. If that's not right, if that's not getting a picture of the kit that is right, I move those around, I change them until it's right. Next up is kick and snare. So the kick, on this setup, I have two mics. Whenever I have multiple mics, to me, that is one sound still. So there's two mics, but they're getting summed on the console to go to one channel. It's just capturing one single sound, and I just blend them as necessary to print. Same thing with the top snare mics. I commonly run two. They do different things. I get the blend I want, summed together on the console, gets printed to one channel. And that's fairly typical, or at least miking the kick and the snare is fairly typical. Same thing with the toms. So if you're looking at a normal setup, you have the kick mic'd, you have the snare mic'd, you have the tom mics, you have overheads, maybe you have a hi-hat and or a ride. Fairly typical close mic setup. How I start to augment this, or where I look at what I call zones, are can I break this down if I don't want the close mic sound? And a lot of the times what I do to start with is this mic right here, which I call the kit front mic. And this is measured the same distance from the center of the overhead, or center of the snare drum as the overheads are. That way, if I wanted to, I could shut all the other mics off, pull up this kit front mic and my overheads, and I have a drum sound. There's a 3-mic minimal mic setup right at the heart of this gigantic mic setup. Now this front mic, a lot of the times will be kind of a kick mic as well. It's gonna help with the toms. If I'm using that inside the whole setup, this mic can add a little bit of ambience or space without sounding roomy. It can also help extend the kick drum and give it some depth, which is nice. Or you can shut all the close mics off and bam, we have this 3-mic minimal setup. So a mixing that gives you options, maybe depending on your style, maybe we're doing 5, 6, 7 songs and we need different things for different songs. That would allow us to make adjustments on the fly while we're mixing, and it's pretty cool. Another one is this over the kick mic. And this kind of moves around depending on what I'm doing. If I'm going super minimal, this mic might be back a little bit further, kind of in this area. In this case, when I'm using big setups, a lot of the times I like to hang this right over the edge of the kick drum. So it's far enough over that the mic is off axis from the beater, but it can still get some sound straight up to the mic from there, but it's facing the snare drum. A little of this goes a long way, especially if you compress it. You just tuck it in, and it can really add some juice to your kick and your snare, and sometimes even the toms, depending on where the placement is. And that's all that is. That's kind of a, pull into taste kind of thing if you need it. Could be one of those things that maybe is off during the verses, on during the choruses. So there's options there. But anyway, that's kind of how I look at this. So you've got, basically you have a 3-mic setup in here, you have a full close mic setup in here, and then you have kind of an augmentation mic that you can use if needed, or just use sometimes during out song. Now the next thing that I really love is room mics or ambient mics, because to me they're color mics. They can really help shape the space of a song throughout a mix. Let's take a look at that. Okay, I'm going handheld on this so I can move the camera around and explain things a little bit easier. If you've watched any of my other videos, you already know I love room mics. I love ambient mics. They're fun. They're a great way to add depth to your drum sound, your songs. They're also a great way to, if you change them up as you're going through the song and use different room mics or ambient mics for different sections, you can really change the vibe and the overall color and have a lot of fun with it. So a couple things that I do commonly. Let's start with that. First off, there's almost always a kind of what I call my normal room mic. And it's usually going to be my AT4080s or something like that. I love those. And we're about 9-10 feet in front of the kit. And the height will vary. Right now we're about 3.5 feet up looking at the kit, and I may go down a little bit lower if I wanted to get less cymbals and more of the bottom end. I may raise it up a little bit more if I need to capture more cymbals or make it a little bit brighter. But that's a really typical setup. The one thing I like about the ribbons is they're really smooth with the cymbals, especially after being hit with a compressor. So you can really add some cool ambience that way. Now, one thing that varies. Down here, I have a mono room mic. This is low in this case. Sometimes I will go above these microphones here. Sometimes they may be 2 or 3 feet up here, so it'd be looking down more like this in a mono fashion of the kit instead of down here like this. Now, a couple things here to note. One, you could use it on its own just for a mono room, because you can create, especially with the ribbon since it's figure 8, you can create some space. Especially I've got a large enough room, but even in a smaller room, you can add ambience without making it too washy left or right, especially if you've got a song maybe that the drummer's playing tons and tons of cymbals. Sometimes room mics can get a little bit out of hand. That mono room mic won't really do that. You can just bring a little bit of it in. Now, one thing, and this is why I do a lot of the times like putting my mono room mic around my stereo rooms here, is I'd like, whether it's down below or whether it's, higher up top, I like being able to pull those 3 mics up at the same time and create its own sound. Like with what we did with Juan, that was kind of what he wanted to have as a main sound. So we made sure that those 3 mics were in phase. With the mono room being low, it helped support the kick drum. With the others being just, 3.5, 4 feet off the ground, you got enough of the kit without being too cymbally or too harsh, and it created a really cool sound. They're in phase with the rest of the kit, so you can either have a really cool close mic sound with some room, or you could back the close mics down and go heavy on those rooms and just pull the close mics in a little bit for some cut. So it's real important that these 3 microphones be in phase. Now, there's times where I might be running that low one actually on the floor like a PZM. There's a video I did not too long ago with that. Check that one out, because that's actually a really cool trick for getting some room tones that sound a little bit different than everything else. But that's my one room zone. In phase with the kit, sounds cool on its own, can augment the rest of the kit, or you can kill them entirely and go dry, or you could kill the rooms entirely and the close mics entirely and just have the 3 mic setup. So see where I'm going with this? They don't necessarily all have to get used. Mixing tools, sound tools, right? Now, the next thing I'll do a lot of the times is I like to get a pair as far away from the kit as possible. In this case, a lot of the times I have just my good old Roswell Pro Audio Delphos because I like the way they handle cymbals, and they are a ways from the drum set. Now I realize not everybody, where's that mic? Let me see it. Oh, poop, bumped it. There we go. So this is kind of what it's looking at. And these are spread a little bit wider. Kind of measured off. I'm not going to go as far as to say that I actually pulled a tape measure out. I do it a little bit by ear and a little bit that I know my room, so I know where they need to be to get the sound I want and still be in phase. But they really are kind of, for the most part, measured from the kick drum so they're even. Now those mics are not necessarily in phase with my middle rooms. I have had times where I do it that way so I can turn all the room mics on, but usually my room mics are also different zones or different characters. So you have my mid room or my normal rooms. I have the big rooms, which are the ones up on the wall. Occasionally I'll run a low spaced pair, or if you've seen the other video, you know I like to put a mic right over here on this wall at 57. That's really cool. Which is its own kind of zone, and they come on and off as needed or to help, just add a bit of character and dynamics to the sound. So they're not all supposed to be used at the same time. And sometimes I shut every room mic off and don't use them at all. And it'll depend on style, really. Well, especially with this mic. This guy here in the front, this kit front mic. If I'm doing, metal or hard rock or something like that, where there's maybe the drummer's got, 3 rack toms, or there's a lot of heavy cymbal stuff going on, sometimes I won't use that microphone. Occasionally I've moved it up as kind of a third overhead from the top. Well, actually with Blood Feast Ritual, I did that. I took a Delphos and I moved it up a little bit higher, and it was a third overhead, so to speak, that kind of got the splash cymbals and stuff in the front because I didn't want to mic them individually. We were trying to keep it natural to the space there. But if there wasn't that there and it was just toms, or if there was a lot of super heavy crashing, I may not use that mic at all, especially if it's a big drum set. But I make that decision after I talk to the artist and see what they want. But that's kind of how I look at it. It's different zones. Got close zone, I've got my minimal zone, I have one room zone, which is my mid rooms, I have my second room zone with the big guy, and then sometimes I'll have a third room zone, which may be on the floor or the wall or something else like that. And then sometimes I don't use any of them. They don't have to get used. But if I am doing a big setup like this, that's kind of my thought process behind all this. Now the type of mics, that is a big question. I'm gonna put this camera down for a second and answer that as best I can. Okay, what mics am I choosing and why? It's a pretty big question, but I would say that decision all starts with a conversation with the artist on what type of sound they want or what we're going for, especially if I'm producing and I get to help do this from the top of the process and I'm going all the way through the mixing, then we really are working together to develop something that's going all the way through to the end. If I'm just tracking and it's going somewhere else, I do my best to go, okay, here's what they're asking for, without going totally nuts and having another engineer think I'm totally batshit crazy, which has happened. But it all comes down to the artist and the sound we're going for, and me trying to interpret that and then maybe take it up a notch. So let's start with this 3 mic setup, that zone. This kit front mic, a lot of the times it's going to depend on style. For this thing we did with Juan, he wanted something a bit different, not hi-fi, kind of open, and I love my little red 12 from 12 gauge microphones for that. If it's something more indie, or maybe it's something, Americana, countries, that sort of thing, I would probably have a condenser here. Would be my Audio-Technica AT4047 or Roswell Pro Audio Delphos. Both of those do an amazing job. Overheads, it depends. A lot of the times I use my Mini K47s. They work. Occasionally I'll swap out maybe my mid rooms if I want something smoother and darker, and I'll throw the 4080s on the overhead. And if that was the case, my mid rooms would most likely become a condenser. So I'd have a ribbon up here, condenser out in the room. So I'm not a big fan of having all my room options or overheads all the same type of microphone. I like kind of the depth thing. So condenser, mid-rooms, ribbons. Ribbons, mid-room condenser, that sort of thing. But this is probably the mic that would change the most. I have also used a SM57 right here, which is pretty freaking cool too, actually. But it's a grittier sound. Again, it comes back to what the artist is asking for. Toms, that'll depend on the sound we're doing and the size of the kit. I go back and forth between my PR30s, probably my first choice, and my Audio-Technica AE3000s. They're both fantastic. They are a little bit different. You know, the highs are a bit more punchy and controlled, where you can get a little bit more of the top end and openness from the condenser. Again, it will depend on what we're looking at getting a little bit. Snare mic, I have my 2 on the top, and that gets adjusted on the console with the faders. You know, one's a dynamic, one's a condenser. And like I said, with room mics, it depends on kind of what's at the overhead and how big a sound we want. If we want it dark, if we want it bright. Usually that's why I have my mid-rooms or my 4080s, and then up on the walls are the Delphos, because not only are they obviously different because they're in different places, but they also just give you a different overall color because you have a ribbon and a condenser. Sometimes when I'm running the 3 in the middle, I'll have 2 of them ribbon and 1 condenser. I like my Audio-Technica 4050 to go as a mono room sometimes. I've used the Roswell Pro Audio Colaris actually, which is really cool as a mono room. And that way, if I mix that with the ribbons, I get a bit more open sound, maybe some extended open low end from the condenser, and the smoother, more full sound of the ribbons. So it's kind of, I mean, it really does come down to what we're looking, what the artist is looking for. But that's how I look at this anyway. And these all come off discussions with the artist, because at the end of the day, my job is to help them get out what's in their head so they're hearing what they want to hear. But anyway, that's a bit of that's what I think of all this mics. That's where I'm coming from. That's why I set up a lot of mics sometimes. Doesn't mean they all get used. Experiment with this a little bit at home. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys soon. Happy recording.